Could you please introduce yourself with your name, title, project, and maybe a little bit about what you're actually doing day to day?
Sure. So my name's David. I'm one of the co-founders at Drift. Affectionately known as Cindy's co-founder. Everybody knows Cindy, but I'm the other half, I suppose. I look after legal operations. My background's in law. So naturally, I get handed all the things that my co-founders don't want to do. So all that falls to me, hence the very affectionate title of Chief-Janitor.
How are you? I should ask.
I'm well. Yes. It's a fantastic week so far. Manic running around. Weather could be better, but I think honestly, productive, shall we say.
All things considered, you're calm. You're ready for the storm of the conference itself?
I always think I am. Then I realize that I'm sorely underprepared. So tonight, hopefully, it's going to be a quieter night. 4 breakpoints in, I think I have learned to pace myself a little better.
Talk to me about Drift. It's been growing, it's getting a lot of attention. You guys have launched some pretty cool things, and there's some really shiny objects outside. Before we get to the shiny objects, before we get there, talk to me about Drift. What have you been up to over the last 12 months that's really allowed us to get to this point where so much attention and so much focus is on you guys?
It's been quite a journey. I mean, we started building, I'll give you some context, we started building in March of 21. So a very early vintage where I think there were less than 10 protocols on Solana. And obviously we saw highs in 21, lows in 22, and even lower lows at the end of 22. We sort of saw it all. I think even for Drift, we at some point blew up, for lack of a better word, in 2022. And that was probably the biggest learning experience for us and the team. In the last 12 months, I think primarily focusing on, I guess, the core product, which has been perps. I think being the best perps DEX was our mission for the past 3 years. It still remains our mission, but I'd like to think that our goal has increased and grown since, particularly with the arrival of BET. BET stands for Bullish on everything. It doesn't refer to gambling or bet, but it is our prediction market and it's our response to Polymarket. It's obviously very different in terms of its design. It's cross-margin, cross-collateralized, so that you could theoretically deposit anything, whether it's BTC, Sol, ETH, Drift, Jupe, Cheetah as collateral, and then put on a position. And the really cool thing is that you can actually go, for instance, long Trump. So you could bet on Trump winning and short Bitcoin as a clever structured trade. Whether that goes well or not, this is not financial advice, but the fact that it's all cross-margin with any collateral means that you can really trade and bet anything with anything. So that's been a mission. And so we've been really focused on that as our North Star to increase asset availability and just give people more ways to get involved. I think the biggest observation from BET was a lot of new users that never touched perps started to use BET. I think that was super cool to observe. So we really want to take growing new products and transform that into its own pod. Hopefully grow a permissionless version of that where you and I could have our own private betting market. I feel like that'd be really, really cool in social means as well. Like guys, like what do we think the price of Sol's going to be? And then between maybe 5-7 people, do we think Sol's going to go above X? We could also just create our own rules for what that looks like. So I feel like there's so many layers on top of this primitive that is BET that we could do. So lots of room for experimentation.
Really bullish on everything seems to be baked into the way you think about it.
Though that said, some people do, when they see the cars, they're calling for the tops. Whenever you see shiny cars with logos on them, they're like, okay, this is like symptomatic of tops coming in. Obviously, I think for us, our company's the project's name is Drift. F1's around the corner, so given those two concepts, we just couldn't pass up the sports cars. So I think our marketing team has done a fantastic job.
Tell me about the cars.
So initially, we presented these as Drift Lambos. There's actually only one Lambo. There's McLaren, there's a Porsche, and Ferrari as well. So I think to the purists out there, I think we were called out very, very poignantly that, hey, this is actually McLaren, not a Lambo. So apologies to all the people out there who are enthusiasts. But I think for us, it was just a fun way to engage with people, I think. But I think on a more community level, we actually wanted this to be a way where our community members who were the most engaged with us would stake the most Drift on the project, on the platform, where would actually enjoy it. So it's actually a VIP service in terms of how we thought about it. Obviously, it's nice for show, shiny, but if you're a loyal Drift user, you've been with us for a while, you've accumulated, you're voting on governance, you're doing things as part of the network. We wanted this to be a way that people are rewarded. So we've actually had a lot of people that we never met book a ride and come to us and say, I had a fantastic time. You guys are a great platform. We really enjoyed it. So I think that way of connecting with our most active users in person has been probably like the biggest thing coming out of this. So all fun stuff aside, just connecting with our best users and our most loyal users has been honestly the most refreshing thing.
We are here in Singapore. As you said, the Formula One is around the corner. but there's Token 2049, there's Stakepoint, there's Breakpoint, so many conferences happening. The entire industry's attention seems to be focused on Singapore right now. So what are you most focused on in Singapore this week?
Great question. I think for me, having spent a lot of time in Singapore in, I want to say 2017 to 2020, it's actually where I started my crypto journey, was at a Singaporean venture fund, not too far from here, about probably like 500 meters down the road. So that's actually where things started for me. So it means a lot being back here. I think consumer, honestly, is really big for me in Singapore. In an environment and region where we hear Southeast Asia is not Singapore, Southeast Asia first. So Singapore, Vietnam, Taiwan, Thailand, all those countries are all very mobile, first. So for us, we think DeFi is a fantastic way to engage with these users. People who might not be able to access a centralized platform, go through the KYC, should be able to connect with DeFi platforms with absolute ease. So for us, for Drift as a platform, connecting with those users, getting in the weeds with the consumers is something we want to do. And the best way to do that is to be on the ground, talking to those customers. So I think that's probably the biggest thing for us, is to really spend time with what could be this next wave of users. Because at the end of the day, I think we've done a good job at servicing crypto users, and I think that's been fantastic. But ultimately for DeFi, not just Drift, for DeFi to really win, you have to go that magnitude above that sort of the next 10x amount of users is going to come from all these other consumer related applications. So I think that's my thesis coming into Singapore, and I think I've been pleasantly impressed by the amount of activity here. I think a lot of folks have been approaching it similarly. I was in Korea recently for Korean Blockchain Week. Again, a lot of attention to North Asia. Seeing that being replicated here tells me that, and the fact that Breakpoint is here this year for Solana, otherwise very American company, is a huge step in that direction. So with the whole mobile announcement, this is the region where adoption is going to take place.
Absolutely. And speaking of this next wave of users and adoption and motivating it, what role do you think prediction markets are going to play in bringing, people that haven't really interacted with Web3 or DeFi into the space? Do you feel that the current configuration of prediction markets is more geared towards allowing, degens and DeFi enthusiasts to sort of gamble a little bit, speculate? Or do you think it's really going to be a catalyst for this next wave of users and onboarding new people into the space as well?
I really think it's the latter. I think with meme coins, for instance, I love meme coins. I think it's a great way to express culture. And I think it's a great onboarding tool. People see a dog or a cat or any type of animal they get excited about, they feel attachment to, and they find a way to acquire it. And I think that's great. Obviously, going too far, which is what we've seen with some of the meme coins being launched every day with Pump.Fun, has gone a little bit too value extractive. So when you see people, retail folks, losing, getting value extracted from them and leaving the system, that's a negative. But for the most part, culturally and as an onboarding tool, meme coins are fantastic. We're also seeing that with Mother, celebrities really using meme coins as a way to distribute. Prediction markets is not similar, I think. It is a lot easier to get behind a prediction market, such as the elections, such as who's going to win F1, what might the Fed interest rate cut be, than let's bet on whether Sol's going to go up and down. I think to the average user, they're more likely to know who the presidential folks are versus what is Sol. So I think taking that analogy alone, you are already opening yourselves up to a far broader audience base. So I think for us, even analyzing the very small sample size of just under a month of data, a lot of these users have never really touched the perps on Drift. They've only just used BET as a way to get involved. It's cheaper. It's very cheap to onboard. It's very easy now to get set up. You can use tippling, you can use all types of services to onboard. So the fact that people are finding BET through this ease of onboarding means that we're seeing a wave of new users come on who, again, I think find BET a lot more accessible. To sort of summarize, I think BET is almost like a euphemism for leverage trading. And honestly, it resonates with people a lot more that I can place a prediction market on something that is tangible versus, hey, perpetual instrument feels scary.
And speaking of the derivative space, but then prediction markets more specifically, do we have any data stats about the growth and how much new attention has come into the space?
I think at Polymarket, for instance, I think they've been covered. They obviously pushed out a fantastic product. I'd have to revisit the stats, but I feel like it's well over for billions, so well over 500, 600 mil in TVL. So there's a lot of attention for particularly the biggest markets. It's very much like power laws. The biggest markets see most of it, and then obviously it trickles up perfectly. For us, it's quite similar. I believe the liquidity and the depth for Trump and Kamala are sufficiently deep as well. I think we're the one platform that is competitive to Polymarket. And as we get closer to November, I think that's only going to ramp up, very aggressively. We saw that 4 years ago with FTX and their markets, just a spike in volume in those days, preceding the decision date. I think that's going to be our moment too. So we're excited. I think it's going to grow at a very exponential rate the closer we get. So expect to see some pretty fire metrics come out.
Politics and crypto have been increasingly intertwined over the last 12 months. Crypto has become a voting issue, and both US presidential candidates seem to be sort of seeing what they can do in terms of swaying the single issue crypto voters. And crypto as a whole seems to have a lot more influence over the election cycle this time round than it did in the past as well. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on this politicization of crypto. Do you think it's net negative or net positive, or should we be thinking about it in terms of in a binary sense? The same way we talk about meme coins being net negative or net positive. Is that the right frame of mind to think about politics and crypto?
I would say it's analogous, but not exactly synonymous. It's not exactly like one-to-one, I would say. And the reason for it is that politicization draws great attention to the regulatory framework. I think one thing that has constantly been talked about is just the reg piece and a lot of regulatory uncertainty. I think there's only very select regions in the world, I believe Japan, maybe 2 other regions that have proper vast merger as a service provider rules. So I think the politicization actually draws a lot, very much needed attention to what regulation looks like. There's unfortunately this huge gray area, unclear regulation on where is crypto going, like how do people treat it, what is it, is it a token of security? These are all questions that I think are relevant. I feel like casting a lot more attention on it is really important.
What are the sort of challenges in building a derivative platform?
I think historically derivatives have been obviously a very important part of the financial ecosystem. I think particularly around hedging. I think the very early contracts around derivatives were around commodities. If you were a farmer, you grew corn, you wanted to essentially, you didn't know if it was going to be a good season or a bad season, you might want to hedge that out. So I think that's where the initial concept where you could sort of hedge and someone would be happy to take the other side. So I think in that instance, I think there was actually a very clear need for futures products. I think we are slowly starting to see that as well. And the analogy I'll draw here is for DePIN. Imagine, you are a Helium network provider. You own your HNT in tokens, which is subject to price volatility. But if there's a way you can simply price lock that, you can say, hey, I have all this Helium that I've earned from running my node, my service provider. Can I then hedge that with a short, for instance? In doing so, you might earn the funding rate, but most importantly, you lock in whatever those returns look like. So if you're someone who runs this as a either full-time operation, or if you're like a commercial Helium node operator, you have thousands of these, you really might want to think about hedging that out because, again, there's a lot of volatility that you could be exposed to. So I think in that sense, it makes a lot of sense. And I'm hopeful that should DePIN as a thesis become very widespread, whether it's like energy, the mobile, transportation, who knows what they may be. I do think that a derivatives platform, a derivatives layer is actually very necessary for your average user to feel good about partaking in those networks, because there's nothing worse than having all your earnings go to zero and you have no way to essentially lock that in. So I think in that sense, it makes a lot of sense. As a pure gambling sense, I'm less excited about it. Unfortunately, a lot of crypto over the years has been trading and people betting extreme side, extreme leverage. So I think for me, the bigger thing is for it to be ingrained in just a day-to-day is, grandma doesn't have to know that whatever she's running needs to be hedged on a perp. She can just say, hey, I'm going to hit this button that says price lock. And that abstraction is all we need to see right now. She shouldn't have to think, I'm shorting Helium perp. Do that. She should be seeing price lock and it gets taken care of on the back end. So I think that's where the magic of a lot of the derivatives come from. In an on-chain environment, there's obviously more risk for taking on-chain risk. So more often than not, the yields that you're getting on-chain make up for it. So I think that's actually been quite an interesting comparison point to the traditional markets versus treasuries and whatnot. So that's my hope for it. I think it's obviously somewhat ambitious that, hey, like DePIN's going to be that widely adopted, but in the long term.
And if we think about the slightly shorter term, then in the next 12 months, what are you building? What kind of new projects, initiatives, announcements can we look forward to hearing from you guys?
For sure. In terms of product timeline, I think for us right now, following BET's success, think of it more as horizontal. So, can we build more product lines that get people excited? So one is mobile that we talked about earlier. I think there's a huge distribution that mobile unlocks, but also thinking about upstream, so vertical. We're noticing that a lot of the traders on Drift are a lot larger now. They're trading $5 million, $10 million in size. And if you're trading that big, you want to make sure that whatever you're filling is filled at the best price, minimal slippage. So one thing that we've been experimenting with is that, is there an intent-based system where you can essentially signal to a network of market makers that you want to fill at a certain price, and that fill it in one go. So this is something we've been working on for a while. It's essentially a permutation of our just-in-time liquidity. But again, thinking about an on-chain OTC desk, which is something that we've been pretty excited about to serve those large users. Again, these are power users that trade size, and often they might turn over the book quite aggressively. So we want to make sure that, as much as we love catering to the mums and dads and the retail users, there is that bucket of the power users that we also want to make sure we're not forgetting about.
And these power users, are there any sort of trends you recognize in their usage? Are they retail investors that just have a vast amount of capital to deploy, or are they perhaps not retail investors? Like, where are these power users coming from? And are you noticing any trends in their behavior?
So the first wave of power users were rich hobbyists, like people that just made a lot of money out of the previous bull run. I think their trading behavior is very indifferent to price. They'll put on a big position, market sell, market buy, like X amount of dollars, and that's fine. Arbitrage as market makes happily arbit it away. They love that. I mean, this is the biggest fish in the ocean. And uneducated retail is music to their ears. It's like blood in the water. They take it. What we're seeing now, however, is a lot of smarter traders come on board. I mean, these might be fund managers that are putting parts of their fund on chain to farm things like bases, farm different opportunities. For instance, PYUSD was something that we've supported. The PYUSD rewards for 2-3 weeks were 18% on stables. They went to 15%, 12%. 18% on stables is more than 3 times what the treasury rate is. So in terms of the amount of risk you're taking, yes, there are smart contract risks. Yes, there is some counterparty risk in the form of PayPal, but hey, at the end of the day, 18% is a lot to be getting. So if you're a smart, savvy fund manager who is comfortable with that on-chain risk, you should definitely be doing that. So I think opportunities like these are popping up. Right? I think all these folks want to take the spot that is, for instance, USDC on Solana. So we're seeing incentives being sort of put out that way, and obviously that attracts a lot of people to those programs.
And speaking of this sort of increasing amount of institutional attention and maybe people's risk appetites changing, or maybe counterparty risk going down, smart contract risk being dealt with, institutions are undoubtedly paying more attention to both the crypto space as a whole, but also specifically Solana lately. So we are here at a Solana conference. I'm curious what your thoughts are in terms of Solana's development over the last 12 months.
I think as of right now, I'm probably the most bullish as I've been for. It's why I'm also here for another year in the running. This year in particular, with the release of 1.18, has really seen a significant improvement on just the network and correspondingly what that means for us. Ultimately, any application built on top of Solana is somewhat subject to how the network does. There was a time where the network would go down, it would freeze, and obviously for a perpetuals exchange, that has a lot of trickle-on effects. How do you handle liquidations if the price moves wildly? If people don't get liquidated, how do you solve bad debt? Fortunately, we still have this guy. We've obviously battle tested and gone through those periods and know how to handle situations like that. But on the flip side, it's actually set us up really well when it comes to risk management. We know how to guard against those edge cases. So overall, that's been a fantastic development. I mean, if all the activity that we have right now, Drift right now, $500 million in deposits, anywhere from $200-300 million in daily volume, you probably couldn't do that before. I mean, that alone would have a big, I wouldn't say maybe break the chain, but they would slow the chain down significantly. So I think throughout a series of years, upgrades, I think we've actually gotten to a point where it's a little more manageable. I think for in the short term, for sure, we're still focused on Solana. We don't think about L2s, for instance. The network is able to facilitate what we need. So we're feeling really, really good about it. And I think even today's conversation at DeFi Day, seeing Financer releasing demos, I mean, the standard is constantly shifting upwards, and we couldn't be more excited to be part of it.
So you're in Solana and you're here to stay.
Absolutely.
You mentioned there that you don't really think about layer 2s, which I think is totally fair. And for most people in Solana, it seems to be a fair position to hold as well. But there is still an increasing amount of discussion about layer 2s, right? So whether or not we need them now or in the near future, there's a lot of debate around that. What are your thoughts on layer 2s, Solana specifically?
So I'll break this down in a few pieces. I think layer 2s are going to be needed, but they're going to be needed for very specific things. For instance, gaming. If you have a really high performance game that requires certain things to be settled in the closed environment, you absolutely should have that. For instance, like if a character is moving, that shouldn't be a transaction. And there should be ways to work around that. If a character moving up one square is a transaction that you have to process, that's a bad game, first of all.
Okay.
I think for DeFi specifically, and coming back to Drift, we don't see that need. I think whenever we consider L2's infrastructure changes, it's essentially a cost-benefit analysis. What are the costs doing L2? I think obviously it's time, it's like expertise of the team, being thumbs up to things. But when we think about the ecosystem, you lose composability. First, we have to bridge the L2. So if you're a user, you take your funds from Solana L1, you bridge it to the L2. Again, that's already the first you have to deal with. The second is asset availability. So all the assets that you have on Sol right now, you'd have to bridge somehow. So that already is a terrifying concept for me. Whereas on Drift right now, we have, I want to say 30 or so assets that are available that can all be traded, can all be used as collaterals. We can't do that on L2. So I think those two concepts alone are enough to deter us from it. I do think that if there's a need in the future where we're at millions of users, for instance, and we really do need a high performance environment because the performance is suffering, then I think at that point we would consider that. But for now, and we would also have a bit of critical mass for the ecosystem to be there. $500 million is a good amount of deposits, but it's not that much to warrant your own system. If, however, we're at 5 billion and we're like the market, we had as many deposits as Solana's TBL, then I think the system starts to make more sense, where we're at the critical mass, it already operates as its own sort of economy. But as for now, it's not a priority for us. And I think for the better, it means that Drift can interact with Jupiter, can interact with Camino, people can plug into us, all our wallets. We need a custom wallet. We have Phantom, we have Backpack, we have TipLink. And then, for instance, you want to fill a spot order on Drift, for instance, we can write that to Jupiter from the L2. We can't do that. So there are a lot of these Lego blocks and the intrinsic benefits of those that you lose if you made the decision. So for those reasons, we've been more cautious around just pulling the bullet. Obviously, there was a time where that narrative from VCs was huge. L2s are going to be it. But as people have spent more time building in Solana, we were thinking, well, actually, alongside this monolithic thesis, we might not actually need this, at least not now.
You mentioned a few things there that I want to pick up on. But firstly, critical mass. You said reaching critical mass. What do you think it's going to take for Solana to reach a certain critical mass? Which vertical, perhaps, do you think is the best vehicle or growth catalyst for Solana to get there?
This is a fantastic question. I think it needs a killer consumer app. We don't know what that is. I'm going to draw an analogy back to STEPN back in the days. There was a period where STEPN was responsible for insane amounts of volume on Solana. It made Orca the largest DEX by the longest. I think it was 90% of Orca's volume for a long time because people were just swapping in and out of the GST GMT token.
Mm-hmm.
And
so sorry, I'm going to stop you there. I've got to change this battery out. It's getting a little bit too warm, I think. Okay, we're just about getting to the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
So growth catalysts, killer apps. Where is it going to come from?
I think killer apps is going to come from consumer. Oh, and I analogize this to STEPN back in 2021, where STEPN had some level of Ponzi-nomics involved as a sort of like run to earn type of thing, but it got real users on board. It was labeled as a fitness app on the App Store, and people downloaded that stuff like crazy. You could essentially you would go for a walk and you could earn something. And I remember it becoming the largest volume on Orca by, I think it was like 90% of Orca's volume, because people were just getting this GST token, swapping to USDC, cashing out. They would use these tokens to upgrade their shoes or whatever it was that the income system had. And for the first time, I don't think the network was ready for anything like that. The fact that entire DEX volumes revolved around this run to earn application was phenomenal. I feel like that was at least like the first time I saw, whoa, this is like what the next like 10x, 100x was like. So this is where it's going to come from. We saw snippets of this with Axie Infinity back in the day for on ETH. They obviously had to build their own bridge and everything around Ronin to even consider supporting that. But there were like little snippets and little experiments over the years where serious amounts of consumer, and I'm not talking 10,000, 100,000, I'm talking like millions, users started interacting with it. I think that needs to be the level of abstraction where people are engaging in day-to-day activity. Everyone goes for walking and counts their steps, but not everyone is trading perps on a daily basis. And I think that's how it analogize it. And Solana just being so low cost makes that very accessible. So I think if there is this next consumer app, I think most consumer apps usually have some type of, in-app, in-game marketplace. I think where DeFi comes into it is being that infrastructure on that. So at least for me, that's what I get really excited about. We don't have to be the app, and we're not here to build a consumer app. It's not what we're best at doing. We can be the financial infrastructure that powers your market. You know, if you want a market that sells shoes or sells weapons or sells things, people are playing that. Is there a way that DeFi can seamlessly integrate with that? So that gets really excited.
Yeah. And if you had to pick a single vertical that you think either is the most exciting within the Solana ecosystem or that has the most growth potential, so RWAs, maybe AI, maybe Web3 gaming, DeFi, DePIN, which one excites you the most of all these verticals, and where do you think the highest amount of growth is going to come from?
I think it's definitely DePIN. I think it's a very hard vertical to solve for because they're, unlike traditional software businesses, for us it's just, it's all software, it's all code. But for DePIN, there is a hardware element of it. That's a very hard problem to solve. All of a sudden, you have to do inventory, all those things, and you don't have to think about it's like a software founder. It's like fintech. I like to analyze why fintech is kind of like glorified forms of accounting, one way or another. It all comes back to this core concept. But, however, DePIN, I think, opens up a huge channel. I think one thing that's gotten me really excited recently is like thinking about energy. I think thinking about renewable energy and non-renewables and using that, within various DePIN networks gets me really excited. So I think there are very big problems in the world that I think DePIN has a very fantastic way to solve. I think that we're very far from elegant solutions right now. I mean, for helium, right? For the fact that you would want to expect the coverage of your service here in metropolitan Singapore to be the same as somewhere in Malaysia in the jungle, but that's obviously not going to be the case. You can't support that. So even as founders go to figure out, okay, what remains like decentralized in these DePIN networks and what remains centralized is very, very important. So for me, I think it's a huge lift. Again, I spoke about the financial piece earlier. I think the financial infrastructure for that is quite easier. You can maybe could just be a swap that swaps these tokens to cash. But again, the perpetuals piece and locking that in is also something else. So for me, that's, I think, a lot of the bigger problems outside of the software bubble of just trading lies in DePIN. So I think personally, I think that it hasn't had its moment yet. We've had little snippets of it, but it's still very far away from what I would consider, ready for mass adoption.
Clear. And where within the Solana ecosystem, where do you think we're going over the next 12 months? What are the major turning points, inflection points going to be within the Solana ecosystem that can sort of help us get to that critical mass that we were talking about earlier?
I love to analogize this with how I think about Solana as a country. I think across 21, 22, Solana was this country that was like building small buildings, and these small buildings were like not really resilient. I mean, things happen, these people sell down. I'm talking about FTX and all that, like stuff just wasn't working. A lot of the early projects are no longer with us. But for the first time in the past year, we have seen, I want to say, big buildings, capital cities, however you want to contextualize it, pop up, whether it's Jito, Jupiter, Drift, Camino. We've seen a lot of powerhouses come out, and whether it's people launching tokens, which is one function of that, launching their own foundations. All of a sudden, even for Drift, and what I've been really pleasantly able to see is applications building on top of us as primitive. They're no longer building just on Solana, they're building on us. We think that this financial primitive is very elegant. Could we build a vault on top of what you're doing? Could we build a savings routing app on top of what you're doing? So it's like Lolo, for instance, they route to the best savings. So they built on top as an aggregator across these various savings products. We recently had integration with Squads. Fuse Earn plugs directly into Drift, for instance. Again, this did not exist a year ago. So as we're seeing the land of Solana have, being bigger buildings on them, that's going to just proliferate and give birth to a far more active economy, right? I think when you have buildings and other things, not just barren land, it becomes a lot more, the case to settle there becomes a lot more enticing. So if you think about a new builder as like a potential settler, you want them to move to your country or somewhere else. I like to think that Solana is very much a developing country at an extremely fast pace. ETH is like probably more developed, but Sol is probably the fastest growing. And I think being on that rocket ship, being that capital city, is what a lot of the projects here are excited about. But also the hardest thing to do. I mean, for a long time, we didn't know if this country was going to survive, and I think that was a very real fear across everyone. So that's my analogy that I like to use for growth and where that goes.
I like that analogy a lot. Finally, can you give us some alpha?
Do not write off DePIN with Metal Takeoff. I think watch out for some of the really cool wallets that are going to come out. I think the scariest thing for a lot of mass adoption is Connect Wallet. Connect Wallet is something that people just aren't used to. So as we start moving past what this Connect Wallet challenge. I think we're going to start seeing some very elegant solutions how to get around that. So for me, that's the most exciting thing, because it's the most common piece of feedback is if I have to create a wallet, load it up, and then use that to trade, that's already too many steps. If an embedded wallet has Sol loaded up or has a gasless feature, again, I'm going to be very careful not to spoil too much. Yeah, imagine embedded where you can create an embedded wallet with one click, this a gasless feature, or you can fund a wallet as the application. Again, that removes just one click. It has to be one click. I think that removes so much. All the centralized exchanges will sign up here, one click, you're pretty much in. That moment I think is coming. And I think once that gets figured out, it's going to take it to the next level.
Exciting. Where can we follow along with all your developments in the next 12 months?
Please try the platform if you haven't already, whether it's trade, earn, or bet. So those are the 3 pillars. And also Twitter. I think we have a lot of fun on our Twitter. It's not all just serious posts. If you look at it right now, it's probably running a competition on who's closest to getting that Lambo ride. I think the challenge that we threw out yesterday was if you could spot all 5, you get a ride. And so if I think people have found 4 but not 5. So I think there's one elusive one that's out there. So I think check it out, follow our Twitter, just Drift Protocol, and come along for the ride.
Awesome. Thank you so much for making time to talk to us. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you.